Alright, so I'm going to be really quick, blunt, and upfront with you guys. I'm going to be non-partisan with this, which basically means that I'm not going to be favoring the left or the right side in a lot of my arguments, opinions, and attitudes, because I don't think that helps anyone. Partisan to the left and pandering to this idea of all guns are evil, blah blah blah, it disregards the fact that human beings are fucking deplorable, and if you don't understand that, I mean, where are you gonna go with that? But that said, guys, one thing you need to understand about guns in general is that stupid people use them. It has a lot to do with the whole power trip that you tend to... I'm going to be talking more on the grounds of what we know, what we can actually base on fact, and I feel like this is probably going to sound a little bit more conservative than a lot of my previous videos. So if you are a more liberal-leaning person watching my videos most of the time, understand that I do approach this in a nonpartisan way. I'm not trying to cater to either side, so if you do think that, then I'm sorry. You can post your angry comments down below and tell me your opinions. But please, please, if you're conservative or if you're liberal or whatever, I need you guys to back your shit up, because neither side does that very effectively. Now, one thing that the NRA tends to do is invalidate any sort of legislation by paying off a lot of people. And here's the thing. You can vote for whoever the fuck you want. That's fine. It's not really going to change much. The reality is, for the most part, red states stay red states, blue states stay blue states. That's something you're going to have to kind of just be aware of, much as you might want things to go a certain way. Generally, that's not going to be the case as long as it's against what the majority of the state will vote. It's a cold, fucked up truth, but it is something that I need to preface going into this, because a lot of people are hitting on this idea that where you vote does matter, and it's true. It does matter where you vote, because different opinions of the general populace will have a large influence on who gets into power and their ideological framework, just generally from the reason they joined a certain party, and the attitudes that they personally hold will totally hold sway. Now, that said, I'm not saying everybody is good or bad depending on your party. Reality is, most people suck. And getting more into the actual beef of the issue right now, let's talk about the fact that gun control has been demonstrated to work to more efficacy than no gun control. And of course, the problem with a lot of people's arguments against it is that they like their freedoms. And okay, that's fine. You like your freedoms, I get that, that's fine. You can have your freedoms, but there is a limit to a level of sanity. A lot of people have quoted the weapons of war idea, which, you know, people have counterpointed with the idea that these weapons are used for hunting or personal interest. And I think that there is a level, if that is your main defenses. First of all, there are more effective weapons than an AR-15 for hunting. There are more effective weapons for pleasure use, in other words, things that you can do that aren't as ridiculous and as military modifiable as things like an AR-15 and other weapons. Now, that said, one of the things that needs to be addressed is the idea that gun control is perfect. It's not. It is demonstratively not. And this is actually a lot due to the fact that people are saying the US has no gun control. That's true in a lot of cases, but it's also not true. It really depends where and what area you go to, because states, between them, they have pretty drastically shifting gun laws. And by that I mean some have very strict gun laws and some do not. You have to be aware of what the gun laws are in your particular state and how they differ, because a lot of the problems that some people have is being able to buy a weapon in certain states is legal, whereas in others it's not. And being able to bring the weapon from the state where it's legal to the one where it is not is still technically legal, but it's just kinda should be considered a bit of a red flag. Now, that being said, let's talk about some of the examples that people go to and some of the inaccuracies that they tend to pull up. as far as their evidence towards using gun control as a pull all the guns away. Because one of the things that seems to be brought up a lot is this idea of once this massive shootout happened where they killed something like 23 to 29 people. It was a large group of people. The government saying, okay, that seems a little bit much. Let's put in a ton of regulations so that we can buy back the weapons and slowly make sure that people aren't going to go on a mass murder spree like that again. Now, what people have said is there are no mass murders since that time. Now, that's technically inaccurate because there have been a list of mass murders, but they've primarily not been carried out by weapons like guns. There have been episodes of that happening, but the numbers go from in the 20s of fatalities and casualties in general to a max of around 5 or 6 by these gun deaths. And more importantly, it's not any sort of school shooting or shooting at a larger area for the most part. There was a standoff situation that was in 2004, I believe, and then there was another in 2014, if I'm getting my facts correct on that. And then you have, of course, other countries where gun control is actually employed. Now, one of the things that the US tends to use as a defense is that the US climate is very different from the European climate as far as why they have the control that they do, as well as the fact that the original basis for the Second Amendment is the fact that they were essentially trying to get away from a stronger power being England and being able to establish their own base, which they said, okay, if our government gets out of control, we need to be able to build our own militia and have our own weapons, which does sound like a good idea on paper, but you have to understand within current level context. First of all, when that originally happened, they were talking muskets and similarly advisable weaponry. Now you look at it and you realize that the US is a country with one of, if not the most nuclear weapons, and in general, there are people who have demonstrated a complete capacity to subdue their people. Whether you look at XL pipeline protests that were dealt with in ways that did not even need to include weapons, generally on people who were unarmed, so people who didn't have any sort of way to defend themselves with lethal force. So yes, you can see some definite reasons for why they would want to have some sort of militia or ability to develop some kind of militia. Now, the problem with a lot of this is this idea that we need to have an absolute stockpile of weapons. That is completely unrealistic, and it doesn't address the other major thing that people bring up, which is this idea of self-defense. Now, realistically, for self-defense, a lot of people bring up the single shooter in your own house scenario, and I don't see the logic of having anything more than a Glock at most you would need to actually defend yourself. First of all, because it's a compact weapon that you can bring around the house easily, that isn't going to, first of all, shoot through the walls and inadvertently injure other people as badly, especially depending on the type of bullet that you're using, whether it's a more heavily piercing round versus a more blunt round that is more likely to be stopped a little bit easier, but still obviously be able to kill you. Now, of course, you also have the issue of the AR-15 specifically. Like most guns, they're not exactly designed to be hunting. There are specifically weapons designed for hunting, like hunting rifles specifically. You also have crossbows, bow and arrows, that sort of thing that are designed for hunting, which are, in my personal opinion, I think that would be a more interesting and more natural alternative to something where you literally just click a trigger and kill something. I know there's a little bit more technicality to it, but the fact of the matter is, you know, you don't need an AR-15 to go hunting. First of all, it's a weapon that is semi-automatic with a bump stock, could be modified to be fully automatic, which they still have not made illegal, which I don't understand the logic behind that either, because you have the problem of bump stocks, which are a modifying element of a semi-automatic weapon into something that is illegal and a fully automatic weapon, which is something that needs to be addressed. The idea that there is automatic weapons being illegal across the United States. It is true that this is not allowed in the continental US. across the board. There are small things that have actually been implemented as far as gun restrictions over the entire country, but the majority of the gun laws in the US are hugely diverse and change state to state. So it's not effective to say, okay, we're going to change things here, but they're not going to affect anywhere else. Because the reality is, all these shootings happen in completely different areas. If you look at them, they're generally grouped to places where the gun laws are weaker. So the implication by this fact is that maybe gun laws actually change things. And I don't just mean gun laws, but more common sense restrictions, which most people have hit on the idea of better background checks, but the reality is, if you don't put information in that is relevant to actually ascertain the mental state of yourself, and sometimes people don't even understand what is pertinent to include, you have the issue of, okay, well, this person went under the radar, or they didn't even bother to inform. So you have that on its own as a problem, but, you know, is what it is. You have to realize that people are shitty, and the other problem is that if they had only a knife, first of all, it would be actually much more difficult to kill a high volume of people in a short period of time like you would have with an AR-15 or a just general gun at all, because first of all, you have to be able to actually stab them in a place where it would be fatal. And I say this having known friends who have been stabbed in the past in places that may have injured them to a degree, but they were actually able to get the proper treatment so that they were not in a fatal position of any kind. So the reality being, it's much less fatal to have a knife, and it's harder to make bombs, which is another argument for why are these like not the... There's a really dumb argument where guns, knives, and bombs and cars are just as deadly or similarly deadly and kill similar amounts of people, but why aren't the regulations? The fact of the matter being, which I don't understand why people ignore this, is there are genuinely regulations. You're not allowed to make bombs. You're not allowed to have knives of a certain length for the most part. Obviously, different states have different rules on that for the most part. Generally, you're not allowed to have something longer than a foot of a blade, which is what would be the most effective for doing some serious damage in a short period of time. Then you, of course, also have the fact that cars have literally the rules of the road, and hell, people get knocked down with driving for shit half the time that doesn't make a lot of sense. So there are massive regulations for cars, and obviously bombs, there's a regulation of you're not allowed to do that outside of a firework, and even then there is a lot of red tape you have to go around. And I say this as someone who's actually working on film. I have some familiarity with the regulations and red tape you actually have to go through in order to do that, even for a film set. There's a lot of stuff you have to be aware of. You have to let a lot of people know, unless you're doing a guerrilla shoot, in which case there's all kinds of legal implications that can be problematic if you're just shooting without permission. But my point, guys, is there's a lot of things that people don't seem to address on either side. And it's frustrating because if you don't have a full understanding of the facts, or at least as much as you possibly can, and trying to understand the other side's argument, then you're not going to actually get anywhere. You're going to just think that you're right and they're wrong. And the problem is, while not everybody is the majority right, there are right ideas in both. And you have to acknowledge that and understand why the logic and the value of certain things are not necessarily equivalent, and why they shouldn't be valued as much as they are, even though this has clearly affected a lot of people. Now, again, I keep mentioning the fact, but here's the reality and why Australia and Canada make good examples of why gun restrictions work well. First of all, you have the fact that at most you generally have one, maybe two mass shootings or massacres in Canada per year that happen that are related to guns. Actually, no, just that happen. Generally, the ones that are related to guns are every couple of years. In Canada, and when you look to Australia, whose gun regulations are generally stricter, you actually have this problem of the last gun-related attack was, well, obviously there was the one that was only a couple of years ago. Before that, it was over a decade before the last mass shooting that they had. And again, that was only 5 people that ended up being killed. So you have to understand that while obviously gun regulations won't stop everything from every single instance from happening, it will mitigate the vast majority. And you have to understand from these case studies that they are effective in regulating the issues that many people have with firearms in general. And to be fully ignorant of these facts is just intellectually dishonest. So that is my thoughts, guys. I know this is a 20-minute rant, and I apologize if it might have sounded too left or too right or too whatever. But the reality is you have to understand both sides of the argument in order to come to a decent conclusion. Now, myself, personally, first of all, I'm Canadian, so my particular ideas are not specific to, okay, this state feels this way, this state feels this way, this state feels that way, this state feels other way. That's not the way I'm thinking. Again, I am a bit of an outsider from the States, but I'm similar enough in my day-to-day life with a lot of the ways that the US works, and I'm semi-familiar with it, that I feel I can offer a more nuanced look while also having a slightly more third-party interpretation. So I hope that helps. If it doesn't, I apologize for wasting your time. But anyway, guys, thank you so much for watching. My name is Splice Knight, and I really hope you guys learned something from this. You can go forward and feel like you've been vindicated or you've been attacked. I don't care. You can comment down below if you so choose. I don't care. You can share this with people, let them know that there are nuances to the facts that they attempt to throw out there, and they have to be aware of those in order to more honestly demonstrate their point of view. You obviously need to understand that there are different ways to look at things, and of course, the fact that we keep seeing all these mass shootings in America is indicative of a trend. And being ignorant to this is just plain stupid. So, with that said, guys, thank you so much for watching. My name's Splice Knight. If you guys have any questions, or if you guys want to rage at me online, you can see me at Splice Knight on all social media and all that good shit. If you like this video, don't forget to subscribe, hit that notification bell to be notified of any and all next videos that I come out with, which, again, will not be politically or this centric. They will be more philosophy or psychology based, but I just felt I needed to get this out because I kept seeing a lot of misrepresentation of facts on both sides, and I wanted to give my opinions and thoughts. If you enjoyed this, let me know. Hit that like button, hit that dislike button. I don't really care. Honestly, I want to hear your opinions, I want to hear your thoughts, I want to hear your counter positions, and I want to hear and see your facts that you have to back it up, because honestly, there are probably some things that I may have skewed in one way or the other, and I want to make sure that my personal opinion and my ability to understand the situation is as balanced as possible, and there are ways that it probably slipped one way or the other. So, with that said, I need you guys to keep me intellectually honest in the comments down below, and I will do as much updating of this as is required in order to keep a maintained, balanced, and accurate interpretation of the facts. With that said, guys, for the last time, my name is Splice Knight, and I will see you guys next time. Splice out.